Coming up on Messenger, today we dive into the story of Esther, a woman of courage and faith. She risked everything to save her people, standing firm in God's plan even when the stakes were high. Her story reminds us that God calls us for a purpose, and when we trust Him, He gives us the strength to step forward. We also have an exciting Pathfinder segment with Naomi Zita. Plus, we'll sit down with Garner to hear how he's using gardening and nature to share faith in a unique way. You won't want to miss this inspiring episode. Hello and welcome to Messenger. I'm Adriana, and I'm so glad you're here for another inspiring episode. Today, we're looking at the story of Esther, a woman who listened to God's call, stood in faith, and changed history. Esther was an ordinary woman placed in an extraordinary position. She became queen at a time when her people faced certain destruction. But instead of staying silent, she took a bold step of faith. She risked her life to stand before the king, trusting that God had placed her there for a reason. Her story is a powerful reminder that God positions us for a purpose. Sometimes we may not understand why we're in a certain place or season. But like Esther, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for something greater. Today, we'll hear stories that echo Esther's courage. We'll see how faith moves people to action, how nature reveals God's hand, and how simple acts of obedience can open doors to powerful ministry. Let's begin with our Pathfinder segment with Naomi Zita.
Hi Pathfinders, and welcome back. Today we're exploring another incredible story of courage and leadership in the Bible. Can you guess what it is? Well, it's the story of Esther. Esther's journey shows us the importance of standing up for what's right and how God calls us to lead with faith, even in difficult circumstances. Now, Esther wasn't just a queen. She was a leader who used her position to save her people. Her story ties perfectly into the Junior Youth Leadership Honor, which teaches us how to lead with wisdom, compassion, and faith. So let's dive right into Esther's story and discover what it means to be a leader like her. Esther's story begins when she was chosen to become Queen of Persia. She was a young Jewish woman raised by her cousin Mordecai, and she probably never imagined she'd end up with such an important position. But soon, Esther's courage was put to the test. A man named Haman, one of the king's officials, had a plan to destroy all the Jews in the kingdom. Haman convinced King Xerxes to sign a decree that would allow this to happen. When Mordecai heard about this plan, he was devastated. He sent a message to Esther urging her to go to the king and plead for her people. But approaching the king without being summoned was risky, even for the queen. If the king didn't hold out his golden scepter to her, she could be killed. At first, Esther was hesitant, but Mordecai reminded her of something important. He said, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Esther realized that God had placed her in the palace for a reason. She called for all the Jews in the kingdom to fast and pray with her. Then, with great courage, she approached the king. To her relief, he welcomed her and listened to her request. Esther revealed Haman's evil plan, and the king put a stop to it. Because of her bravery and leadership, the Jewish people were saved. Esther's story is a powerful example of what it means to be a leader. She showed courage, wisdom, and faith, all of which are qualities we can develop as leaders in our own lives. The Junior Youth Leadership Honor is all about learning how to lead others with these same principles. Let's take a closer look at some of the requirements for this honor and how they connect to Esther's story. The first requirement is to identify 10 qualities of a good leader. Let's name a few of Esther's. Esther demonstrated courage by taking action even when it was risky. She used wisdom when she planned and asked others to pray with her. Compassion was shown when she cared deeply about her people and their future. The second requirement is to learn principles of discipline and leadership. Esther didn't rush into her decision. She took time to pray, fast, and seek wisdom. This reminds us of the importance of being thoughtful and balanced in how we lead others. Another requirement is to prepare others for the goal. Mordecai helped Esther understand her role and supported her in fulfilling it. Similarly, as leaders, we can encourage and prepare others to take on important roles. It's important to understand the difference between juniors and teens. Just as Mordecai guided Esther as she grew into her role, leaders need to understand the unique needs of the people they're working with, whether they're juniors, ages 10 to 12, or teens, ages 13 to 15. Esther's story shows us that leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about serving others and trusting God to guide you. Whether you're helping younger Pathfinders, leading a Sabbath school group, or just being a good example for your friends, you can make a difference by leading with courage and faith. Now, if you're working on the Junior Youth Leadership Honor, take some time to think about how you can apply Esther's qualities to your own leadership journey. Remember, God places each of us in unique positions for such a time as this. Until next time, keep growing, leading, and trusting in God's plan for your life. Let's follow Esther's example and lead with faith, wisdom, and compassion.
Thank you, Pathfinders, for that inspiring lesson. It's always incredible to see young people stepping up to serve. Now, let's continue this theme with an interview that highlights how gardening and faith come together in ministry. Joining us today is Garner Liverpool, the founder of Lessons from the Garden with Garner. Through his passion for nature, he has found unique ways to connect with people and share God's love. Garner, thank you for being here. Can you tell us how Lessons from the Garden started and what inspired you to turn your love for nature into a ministry?
Well, actually, it was during COVID. I was in the backyard. I love taking pictures. I love taking nature pictures, sunsets. But we were restricted to where we could go, and I was in there, but I was concerned about my employees. I work at Canada Post, and my employees were all away from work during that time, and I was home. And yes, I started. The idea was really simple, using pictures, but I got a sarcastic kind of approach to reaching out. So what I did, I tied two fruits that didn't grow in Canada on different trees in the backyard. So I had a lemon and I had a banana, and I would tie it on a tomato tree, on an apple tree, on a whatever is growing in the garden, and I send it out with a text on the message, and the question was, "What plant is it?" And the text was, "By the fruit you will know them." And then people would look at WhatsApp and respond, guess it's pretty obvious. You could tell by the leaves and stuff. Yeah, and honestly, that's how we got started. And during COVID, everybody was alone. So as they checked it out, I messaged them, kind of ask how they doing, kind of start a little conversation, something positive. And what I did answer. So there was a quick answer, and then there was a follow up with a message, which always have the full biblical text. So we have the answer, and if you look at the first few videos, we use the same formula to do the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, but and that's how we got. It sounds so simple as they say that the Lord uses the foolishness of the world to confuse the wise. But that's how Lessons from the Garden got started. And as people respond, we kept sharing the pictures, and we kept sharing every week or whenever something came up as inspired.
How did your upbringing in Grenada influence your passion for gardening and sharing faith through it?
Well, in Grenada, we people of the ground, of the soil. As a child, I grew up having sheep, goat. We went to the garden. We burn coal. We did all kinds of, we plant peas and sorrel and corn, and so it's just a natural part of growing up. And it's just amazing, when you look at Genesis 1, where God outlines, the seeds, the plant, the seeds, fruit bearing trees that, produce seeds. And you could actually put a seed in the ground, and some miracle happens that it comes out and it gives you, hundredfold, as Jesus said even in the parable, 20-fold, 50-fold, 100-fold. And, sometimes it goes on generations. So, to me, being in Canada, I grew up here since I was 12, and having my kids here, I wanted them to experience the joy of seeing how life actually happens. When we live in a big city, and Ellen G. White talks about that too. We need to be able to have a space to grow. And wherever I'm at, I've always grown something, and it's just become a joy that I've been able to, do it and show the kids. Actually, one of our videos on our channel is "Why Does God Call Himself a Chicken?" And we actually raised chickens during COVID, and we're just seeing how the chickens protect them. So the story was really about how God is willing to protect us, but we're not willing to let God do that. And the people in Palestine understood exactly what that meant.
You've built strong relationships with people of different worldviews at your workplace. How did you approach sharing your faith in a way that felt natural and welcoming?
Well, one of the first ways we actually did is just being human. And I think, too often we try to put Jesus never used his religion ahead of the gospel. Jesus met people where they were. So as a supervisor, we're in Canada, and it's very cold, and our carriers out there sometimes long hours. And the company had an initiative to do a warming station, and I led that by bringing in my Grenadian spices and nutmeg and cinnamon, and making oatmeal, and it caught on. So everybody would come in the cafeteria in the morning and get, West Indian style oatmeal and that kind of stuff. So it was an opportunity to share. Also, sometimes when it's really cold, I'll make soups from home and bring in and stuff. So we developed relationships like that. And I also, if I had garden items, I would share. And then I had other friends who were farmers who, if they had extras or they had, they would share, and then we'll use workplace as a way of distributing it. So we're meeting needs, and, just really showing people you care. And the time we got to COVID, we were doing that for a number of years. So it was just a natural outflow. But part of the workplace, I determined a while ago that I needed to change the narrative. Too often we in the workplace, and we hear certain things, or people talk about the weekend and they might be doing stuff sinful, and we just sit there and listen it. Right. So part of what we did, and I had a number of other believers, Christians in the workplace, that we started talking about, instead of saying, if there's an accident, you got lucky. We talk about God's goodness and how, blessed we are, so part of it was changing the conversations, but also, I would tell Bible stories at work, and it wasn't offensive because, for example, somebody might have said something bad to a letter carrier, and they'll come and tell me in the morning, oh, this customer was rude or disrespectful, and my humorous side of being a Christian, I would say, you think about it, that's not really bad. When, and give them the story of Elisha. when, I mean, go up your bald head, or David to Goliath, you uncircumcised Philistine, So I kind of use being able to tell the story as part of the narrative.
The idea of using photos, nature, and questions to spark conversations about faith is really creative. What has been the most memorable response you've received?
Yeah, well, I think one of the ones that trigger the most response is the chickens, because one, they're like, "Where do you live?" I'm in Brampton. It's are you allowed to raise chickens? Are you And it's like, yeah, there's limited, but nobody does it. The nice thing about it with that again, as I said, was it was a community thing. So I hatched the chickens from eggs that one of my family friends had got me. And we got a couple, and then we had bought a couple because the first batch didn't go as well. The chickens were community chickens. So sometimes they'll go under the fence and the people would bring it back in a box. So yeah, the chicken stuff, and explaining, because even with Christians, I get the reaction like, um, when does God call himself a chicken? So I had to explain, oh Jerusalem, how I love to gather you as a hen gathered chicks. I said, too often we get our chickens from the store, so we can't tell the hen from the from the roosters. But back then people knew what a chicken was, and the symbolism of God being so loving and caring, that he's calling and we're not even coming. The hawks are flying around. Disasters are what to happen. And he's saying, "Oh, I would love to gather you under your wings." And you choose not to. So yeah, so that's one of the ones that people, and I had real chickens, and the chickens are in the video too, so people were able to, yes, relate.
Your ministry focuses a lot on meeting people where they are, whether through gardening, nature, or conversation. Why do you think this approach is so effective?
Because you put them first. We humans first. Jesus came to, to die for all of us. It's not, and I think too often we forget that he loves everybody. Like, he doesn't wish for anyone to perish. And so with me, by reaching people where they're at, and uh, and understanding where they're coming from, because I tell people, if I was born in a different part of the world, I might have a different experience. So one of the things that happened a couple of years ago during prior to Easter, because Easter we always shut down, so we told them we're gonna do like a thank Easter like brunch on the Thursday, and I told the people, the Christians there, I says, um, if they ask you why, because every other culture brings in their own stuff and celebrates, we'll tell them that God died and he rose again for us on Easter. And at the end, older Indian lady came up to me and said, "How could God die?" And my honest reaction to her was, guess what? No Christian have ever asked me that. We've just accepted it by faith that God could die, and that's the way it is. And so that really changed my mind on how to approach people who doesn't even grasp that concept. It seems so simple to us. Yeah, Jesus died, so part of what I do, I break down the gospel to where people are at, and we talk about the God, the creator, and with creation, we bring in the Sabbath. Most of my friends who are non-Christian, they're already vegetarians. And they're ahead of us in understanding, God. I got a really good reaction when I explained the fact that a God created the world and expected to feed billions of people without the shedding of blood. Right? The way it was supposed to be, nuts, grains, fruits, vegetables, but everybody would be fed and everybody would be, so yeah, so in that sense, we're able to connect because they already understand nature, but they don't really know the God of nature.
Your senior gardening project is such a beautiful way to serve the community. What inspired this idea, and how has it been received so far?
Well, it's location. Sometimes the Lord puts you in places for different reasons. I moved about 3 years ago, to an older part of the city. Well, my old house was over in a newer part of the city, younger families, and this is an established community about 30 years. A lot of the people are original owners, and they're widows, and but as you walk through the neighborhood, and we have an area where you can see the backyards. They got big backyards. Sometimes they got garden beds, and they weren't used. They were empty. And so part of what the idea came to me, well, and the other part to that was, I really believe the Holy Spirit shows me no matter how amazing my videos are, they might never see it. All right. So the fact that they're walking up to their door, knocking the door by itself might not get me to have a conversation with them. They're like, who are you? So part of what we did actually, we started growing seeds ourselves, and it was just amazing. And that's how we ended up on. Where the idea was seeds are the most expensive part of that if you want to do that. So if you could get some tomatoes, some peppers, whatever, just to get in the door, and once you approach them and we actually went out and bought a tiller so we could do the gardens up and stuff. And once you do, guess what? When you go back to visit, guess who you're talking about? The God who sent the rain, the God who caused the plant to grow. So without, hitting anybody on the head, you actually get to share the ministry in a natural way that you support him. And right now we're looking at expanding and getting, with food insecurity and the situation right now, we're looking at getting some youths involved and maybe some immigrants, and doing that cultural bridge where maybe they could grow okra or pepper, and have the conversations on how we got here, and in time will be a full suck of stuff. The other nice thing is I've approached the city and met with a couple of the councillors, and they were willing to give me plants from the greenhouse and soil and stuff. So yeah, so God is good. I'm hoping that this is a ministry we could take across the country, because I think there's a lot of people, a lot of seniors living isolated, and just even having the contact or the knowing that we're going to be there regularly on a weekly basis, and maybe be able to share, meals or whatever. I think it's a great idea, and I'm hoping to expand it.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to share their faith but isn't sure how to start?
Well, I really believe that we all got gifts. I didn't know anything about editing and making videos. Again, I tell the story that a friend of mine, Peter, I've been writing the messages on WhatsApp, and he's like, I'm reading all week, and it'd be nice that I don't have to read on the weekend. Could you record one for me? And that's how the YouTube channel started, literally. But really, I think it's really using the passions and the gifts God has provided you with. Though, don't go looking for something that you're not good at, or something that you're not interested in. Really, I think as God told Moses, use what's in your hand. And the whole, remember, this is not our job. This is God's job. We are just woke men helping God to accomplish winning people for the kingdom. So I don't really believe that God will not let you down. I take pictures, and every week my Happy Sabbath posters are always, actually before the Happy Sabbath, the poster's always been a nature. And I asked God, I says, I want to start this, but I don't want it to be just, start and stop. But I says, I would love to do it. And every week I've always had something interesting. It might not be amazing, but there's always something interesting that I got inspired with. And I really believe that's how the Lord works, that he does open doors and he does give you ideas. It's his work. That's as simple as I could put it. So, if you have a passion, if you have anything you have that God's blessed you with, could be used for ministry. And I think sometimes we always think inside the box. I didn't think I would be here. No, I was just taking pictures, sharing with my colleagues. Sometimes we want to do something big, but the Lord needs to take us through the journey to learn to write, to sing, to do whatever it is. And we need to be led and let the Holy Spirit lead us in where he needs us to go.
How can others support or get involved with Lessons from the Garden and your other outreach efforts?
Lessons from the Garden right now, we are actually in the process of doing a website. we'll announce it on the channel when it comes out. But really supporting the channel and sharing. I think the messages we produce are kind of different. As you're saying, it breaks down. We're not even at sometimes we don't even talk about Jesus as yet because the people I was dealing with weren't there. Like Paul says, you're babes. I can't give you hard food. You're having milk. And I really see my role as milk. And as people grow, we have Bible studies in with Hope Channel. We have the Hope Study classes and stuff. We can always direct people there. But really, right now, my passion is, and understanding the community I live in, is that the people I'm reaching is really learning something new. It's like Paul in Athens, where it's like, that God, the other God, that, unnamed God, that's, really bringing the love of God to people. And with supporting, if you could subscribe to the channel, we got email address as well, lessonswithgarner@gmail.com. And just support us that way. And as we roll out, we're looking at doing some of our nature pictures. Really, we're hoping to share prints and stuff like that. But that'll be rolling out soon. But it's one step right now. It's just really sharing the journey and sharing a God that loves us more than we could even imagine.
That's such a beautiful ministry, Garner. Thank you for sharing how God can use even the simplest things like a garden to reach hearts and change lives. Esther's story teaches us that God places us in specific moments for a reason. It may not always be easy. It may even be risky. But when we trust Him, He gives us the strength to stand, to speak, and to act. If today's episode has inspired you, consider subscribing to the Canadian Adventist Messenger magazine. You can receive a free subscription through your local Seventh-day Adventist Church in Canada, or opt for a yearly subscription for just $20. You can also support this ministry by becoming an agent of hope. Your participation helps us continue spreading God's love and message of faith. To donate, visit agentsofhope.ca, where you can give by debit, credit, Apple Pay, or Google Pay. E-transfers are also accepted at agentsofhope@hopetv.ca. You can also mail a check payable to Hope Channel Canada at Hope Channel Canada, 1148 King Street East, Oshawa, Ontario, L1H1H8. Or give us a call at 1-855-4HOPE-TV. That's 1-855-446-7388. Thank you for being with us today. Keep spreading hope, standing in faith, and being a messenger in your community.